Hello, welcome in. We are talking today about a new released film called Don't Worry Darling, directed by Olivia Wilde, a psych thriller following 50s housewife Alice and her husband Jack. They live in the utopian experimental town of Victory. Everything seems perfect for this young couple until Alice starts questioning the reality of her husband's job and what exactly goes on there. Don't Worry Darling is doing the rounds heavy on social media at the moment. In case you aren't too aware of what's going on with this film, the behind the scenes drama and controversy has slid with this movie from production right on through to its recent release. Way back when the stars were first announced, Florence Pugh and Shia LaBeouf were originally the top two slated to star in this film. Now, while Florence stayed, Shia was allegedly fired and soon replaced with Harry Styles. Harry Styles and director Olivia Wilde later went on to be seen in a relationship together. Later on, Olivia Wilde is served divorce papers at CinemaCon, and it keeps spiraling from there. Olivia Wilde comes out later to discuss further the firing of Shia LaBeouf, and LaBeouf responds in kind, saying that he was not fired but actually quit the film. He even leaks a video showcasing Olivia Wilde throwing some shade towards lead actress Florence Pugh.
You know, I think this might be a bit of a wake-up call for Miss Flo.
And then we get to the Venice Film Fest, in which Florence does not show up for early press release, only then later in the day showing up for the screening. Tensions are icy with the cast. If you want to see some of the most uncomfortable press release interviews you might ever see, there is a few good tasters out there.
You know, my favorite thing about the movie is it feels like a movie.
But the big thing that came from that event, the weirdest and wildest thing, is Harry Styles caught in a weird video illusion of potentially spitting on Chris Pine. I mean, in a lot of ways, everything that has gone on outside of this film, in terms of how this film has been made, is almost far more compelling than the film will ever be. My sincere apologies, but you know, this tea's fucking good. But regardless of how good the goss is, how does Don't Worry Darling measure up? Well, let me run it by you. Now, I don't want this review to get too spoiler into a way with things, but I'll give you a bit of a glimpse into what worked for the film and then where things fell short. What worked for this film is the creative aspects of the concept. This film has such a creative concept behind it, and that is what drives it to be compelling initially. Just down to the setting and how the characters are set up, the relationships at play. Even from the go, just the sheer perfect nature of this yesteryear world as things just slowly continue to get pulled out from under us, the viewer, and we get further and further down this rabbit hole of what Victory is, who its founder Frank is, and what the reality is of the relationship between Alice and Jack. We can't help but become more intrigued. I think packaging this film into such an old setting that we do sometimes romanticize a bit, particularly in the art sphere, is very clever. If not done a little bit before, we've seen similar concepts played out like this before in, say, something like Stepford Wives. The key theme at play here is that we follow Alice trying to escape what is a very patriarchal society. And the way classic family structures and relationship structures kind of are in this old 50s environment is a very good thematic model for that. So it's a great use of setting, and it's a great use of an aesthetic that we don't associate with as strongly anymore, but still like the look of, to really punch home that sort of message. To craft that kind of perfect setting, or that very aesthetic setting, you need to capture it well on camera, and the cinematographer of this film, Matthew Libatique, does phenomenal work. He's pretty well known for quite a few films, some of his big ones, Black Swan, Requiem for a Dream, but in this instance he's very good at capturing these well-framed shots that feel vibrant and colourful and draw out the sort of ideal aesthetic of Victory. Everywhere you look, everything seems perfect, everything seems equally and evenly framed. But when we get those moments where things start becoming a little bit shattered and broken and stilted and off kilter, we see those shifts in camera, those shifts in how we like capture things. And it just brings it to another level. Particularly those sequences where the film really does become a psych thriller, where we see, like for instance, there's these very nightmarish ballerina figures at one point, and I think the way they are captured is some of my favorite imagery in the film. Working hand in hand with the stunning visuals on display in Don't Worry Darling is film composer John Powell, who crafts the score for this film. His work is pretty phenomenal here. And if you're wondering to yourself, do I know John Powell? Well, you do. How to Train Your Dragon trilogy. How to Train Your Dragon trilogy is just a fine example of some great music, and I'm probably also showing my inner child a little bit here. The music here is far different from that, in that it's chilling and it builds the tension. There's some choir chorus work going on that like almost chants and whispers and really unsettles the viewer. I think that work is great. In terms of the cast, really strong cast all around, led brilliantly by Florence Pugh, who plays Alice. We get a very composed figure at first who's brimming with joy but is also exceptionally devoted to her husband, and then Pugh just gravitates her to be this more curious and inquiring and empathetic figure who slowly turns to someone that is a lot more fearful, paranoid, but also really righteous and strong, and she just breaks away from this character that has been molded at the start of the movie into kind of powerhouse, which is really what a lot of us would be used to seeing Pugh playing. So another fantastic performance by her, easily the strongest. She's closely led up with a pretty solid supporting cast. Olivia Wilde doesn't just direct, she acts within this as quite a hilarious foul-mouthed best friend to Pugh's Alice. She has an interesting subplot that I'm not necessarily sure plays out strongly, but that Wilde plays brilliantly. Chris Pine as Frank. Chris Pine will always have a place in my heart, and I'm just always gonna probably say that he acts well in something. That's just it's bad film criticism, but it's just true. It's just true. In this film, Pine is a charismatic cult leader figure, which isn't to say there's any cult work at play, but he is unsettling. He's very composed, but you never feel safe in a scene that Pine is in. And I think that's great. I think that shows great antagonist work. We've been seeing him doing lots of protagonist performances for years and years. So anytime where he does kind of get to flip the script and play the bad guy is a great thing in my books. Gemma Chan also doing great work out there. She's very unsettling as this kind of manipulator, antagonist figure that goes hand in hand with Pine. The two play off one another exceptionally well. Let's talk about the watermelon sugar in the room, which is Harry Styles. A lot of people have been criticizing Styles' performance, which I can understand. He's still young to the screen, but does he do well in this? There were a few clips circling around wondering if his American accent is probably one of the worst things you've ever heard. Definitely it is. He's playing a British character, so that might actually have something to do with it. Harry Styles may not be the strongest performer in this cast, but he does do a great job. This is someone who feels like he is entirely devoted to the woman he loves, but is torn by his devotion to this thing that he has become a part of. You literally see the conflict playing out in this figure the entire time. He is not so much a rageful character, and when he does get rageful, he's almost as surprised by it as we are, which is great subtle acting work. And I think the more and more we see Harry Styles act, the further he'll go. This was a really good taster for what he can do, and I actually quite liked it. In saying that, he does have this weird tap dance scene, and Harry Styles is a performer in terms of music and dance far before he is an actor, yet it is the most unsettling, strange sequence you've ever seen. The moves feel very fabricated and unreal, and it kind of happens in the middle of the movie, and it makes you go, what's happening? Literally any plain-faced dude could stand up on that stage right now. You could roll the song and they would wiggle their arms around. Anyone could do it. yeah, the bad parts of the film. A lot of it does come down to how far does the story play out? Are we left satisfied at the end of this feature? Is the twist any good as almost any good problem with a thriller? And don't worry darling, it's not a surprising reveal. I don't think anyone's too shocked with where things go. I don't think the film is prepared to go far enough to challenge the audience. And then as the film rushes towards its ending, it hits a real abrupt moment that also happens to be the conclusion. And as an audience member, I felt a little bit cheated. I felt like the movie needed to challenge us more. It's such a relevant topic to what goes on in the world today. I think a lot of how we talk about feminism and a lot about how we talk about a patriarchal society is on display in this movie. They're very much talked about in a very surface level way, and it doesn't go deeper, it doesn't explore as much as what it could. It's definitely the sort of movie that general audiences are going to see and want to rush to. I don't know that you're going to go and find anything there when you go and rush out to see it. The movie's fine, but it lacks depth. It lacks a lot of depth. And a lot of the storylines and subplots, the minute you start poking away at them, thinking about the reality of this world, they start crumbling apart. Stuff that happens earlier in the movie makes sense on its own, but then when you couple it with stuff that happens later in the movie, you're kind of left going, well, if that happened back here, does it make sense that this happens back here? And what actually does happen to any of the other characters by the end of the movie? Because the movie sort of abandons its cast and it just narrows down onto Alice. And that's not necessarily a great move. A great example of that is some of the weaker performances in the film. You know, Nick Kroll and a number of the ensemble cast are just more treated as background dressing. They could go quite far and they could have these standout moments if they were given the chance to stretch their legs, but this isn't the movie to do that in. They're just there to say some lines, fill the room. Other performers like Kiki Lane, who is one of the few black leads in this movie, is essentially treated as the big warning sign. Stuff's gonna go wrong here. It's not looking good for you, Florence Pugh, and it's already too late for me, sort of a role. And that just felt a little diminishing. I feel like, once again, this is a character that could have gone further. She's in flashback scenes that detail her experience, but they don't go far enough. This movie has a sense of the aesthetic it wants to give you, but not the deep story it needs to tell. For that reason, when we get down to the ratings, I think this movie was a little by the by. Yep, it's an average one. I wouldn't push anyone to go out into the movie theaters to see it. It's definitely a sort of 6 out of 10. Hovers right in the middle of what I think a movie should be. Hope you enjoyed the video. Drop on down, give a like, hit the subscribe, and I will see you in the next review.